Is being recorded. The first order of business, as usual, is to call the roll. So when I call your name, please indicate for the record that you're present. Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, present.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, present.
Matt Hamill, I don't know if he's present, and Marnie Crouch present, and we do know that Pat Norton had a conflict and is not able to attend.
Who are the two panelists?
John Whitten and
And you?
Well, if you click up here, you can see what the panelists are. Let's just click right on that little
I just want to see if Matt was in
thing. No, it's just
somewhere in there.
the Hamilton Zoom and John Whitten,
Okay.
those two.
Okay.
Sorry.
So this is kind of a working meeting. I think that we indicated that the public was more than welcome, but we wouldn't be entertaining questions. So the focus of tonight's meeting really is preparation for May 16th, but I'm going to jump to the second order of business, which is to just review the draft overlay district in principle. I don't want to go through it item by item.
Yep.
That job is for another day and will occupy us probably for at least one or two meetings. But I would like to get everyone's impression as to the overall concept. And by that I mean the use of the illustrative plans together with metrics that have yet to be determined would entitle an applicant to have deemed to have satisfied the provisions that are analogous to 8.1.12 that are set forth in the draft bylaw. And in the draft that I have, I said it would also, the applicant would be deemed to have satisfied the certain findings with respect to the special permit light. And that really has to be amended. I think it should say that the planning board would presume that they satisfied those findings. And the reason I say that is that because, although they're using the illustrative plan, all applicants, except those who have an as-of-right designation, would have to submit evidence with respect to stormwater or waste treatment and certain elements that are not coupled with those illustrative plans. And then this draft overlay district is a bit of a hybrid because the use of the illustrative plan enables an applicant to the, and I'm using the term colloquially, special permit light. But also, at our last meeting, we identified various uses that also would entitle an applicant to obtain a special permit light. And so, again, the uses that we determined would require, let's just say, a regular special permit. They're set forth in the table of uses that we discussed at length at our last meeting. So that's kind of the framework. And if you had an opportunity to go through this draft overlay district, a lot of the provisions should look familiar because they're drawn from our other bylaws. And the other thing you may note that there are a number of areas where the planning board has to actually make a determination of how we want to proceed. So we have a use chart, but then at our last meeting, we weren't able to really articulate the uses that might be applicable to the retreat house, to Pilgrim Hall, or the gatehouse. So those are left to be determined. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the table 3 that Emil has prepared, that's the framework for the discussion. We haven't inserted any metrics into that table because that is something the planning board has to discuss in depth. So The real question is this draft overlay district and the concepts contained in it acceptable or not? Again, it's a hybrid, and it's really kind of a carrot and a stick approach, because the illustrative plans present a vision for the site that's absent from the consultant's work product. They weren't actually charged with doing that. So the illustrative plans that Emil and Jonathan prepared can be used to show the public this is what this site might look like. So option one is to use that illustrative plan to gain a determination that certain provisions of the bylaw are either deemed satisfied or presumed satisfied. And then with the regular special permit, that would apply to the uses that we set forth last Tuesday, as well as to any applicant who elects to do its own plan and to ignore the illustrative plans. That's an option, but they have to go through the special design process and whatnot. So, and we have more discretion with respect to those applicants. So if you use the illustrative plan, the planning board's discretion is more circumscribed. It's not eliminated, but it's a little more circumscribed. But if you just go ahead, and there's no penalty for doing it, it's just you have to, go through a little bit more detailed process, and the planning board retains more discretion to approve or reject the application. So that was the idea behind this draft overlay district, and as I said, it pulls provisions from our various bylaws, in fact, a lot from the senior housing bylaw, although it's indicated in this draft overlay district that the senior housing bylaw does not apply, except for the age requirement. So we didn't, I didn't, it didn't make sense to pull in all the provisions of the senior housing bylaw. So if an applicant wanted to put in 55-plus houses, they would do so under this draft overlay district, not under Section 8.2 of our zoning bylaw.
I'd just like to add one comment to your presentation there. I would just like to point out that while you mentioned the illustrative plans, they're very much in preliminary form. They have to be vetted by both the planning
yeah,
board and the public.
absolutely, and the
They need to be
public.
developed, they need to be refined, they need to be edited, and so on. So those are really kind of draft placeholders, is what I would say.
Yeah, just another comment on that, along that same line, is that the intention originally was to evaluate the intensity of the development. So it very is likely that after we do have the public meetings, that it could be revised in ways that are not foreseen at this point.
Right, which would more reflect the feedback.
Yeah.
Right.
Has John Whitten reviewed this?
Yeah, yes. In fact, I had a version of this, and I know you wanted to see it, but Emil and I spoke with John Whitten, and he recommended eliminating some provisions, and he was very helpful in enabling us to articulate the special permit light versus the kind of what I'd say the regular special permit. And then, of course, we determined that the reuse of the dormitories would be as of right. So, yes, he has reviewed it. I noted in certain places where he recommended eliminating provisions. I left that in there. It was about protection of natural areas and heritage landscape, and I italicized the comment. It reflected his comment on that. So that provision will undoubtedly will be removed, but I just left it in there simply so I didn't have to renumber all the other provisions. But that will come out, and he also recommended taking some other provisions that I had in there out, and so they're gone. And he was not crazy about, let me see if I can find it. Maybe that came out. Oh, in section 9.6.1 would be point 2, use not listed. And that provision I left in, John wasn't crazy about it, but I thought the planning board might consider it because, you know, no one's omnipotent. So it may be in subsequent years, a use could be advanced that we hadn't thought of. And so I indicated that through a special permit process, and that the special permit regular, that the planning board might permit that use.
Excuse me, Marnie, could you redirect us to the,
Page 5.
Okay.
Page 5. It says allowable land uses, and then subsection 2, use not listed. So again, Attorney Whitten wasn't wild about that, but I left it in there because I thought it might be something that we could talk about. And again, I'm not married to it by any means, but you never know what the future holds, so.
So you might have addressed this. I'm just looking at some of the references, and it has tables listed.
Oh, yeah, those tables were set separately, so, I think Patrick sent them to you this afternoon, and I had prepared tables 4A, 4B, and 4C, and those tables, 4A, 4B, and 4C, really reflect what we talked about at the last meeting, particularly with respect to uses. And so, Table 1 is the description of the zoning districts. Table 2 is the chart that we filled out last Tuesday. And then the district standards, which have not been filled in, those apply to each district. And we have to make the determination as to what those standards should be. And again, I mentioned 4A, 4B, and 4C, and then I think I have it as, I don't know if it's map 5 or table 5. Oh, table 5 are the illustrative plans. And so again, Patrick sent the illustrative plans. These are the ones we've seen before,
Yeah.
but they're not final. In fact, nothing is final. This is all on the table. Every single provision is on the table for discussion. But the question really is the concept something that we can articulate in very general terms on May 16th?
Good question. Don't know, haven't had a chance to read it.
Well, it was sent to you on Friday, so, it was,
Marty, if I can take a few minutes here. I think the problem that the board faces is one that's been acknowledged several times, which is that we have no plan before us.
right?
So what we're doing is we're thinking about the site as a mosaic, all the things that might occur here and might occur there, and this would be a little better here, and this would be a little better there. And, I mean, at one point, we have a matrix of, all sorts of alternatives, and each alternative involves, a little more fiscal surplus, a little less impact on the environment, and I think there are two problems with doing this way. I can see how we got to this point, which is we got to this point because we had no plan in front of us and because the petitioner wants the most flexibility possible, which is to sort of encourage some things up here and down there, but basically allow a lot of things to occur at a lot of different places. And at the end of the last meeting, we had mentioned the issue that there might be some incompatibilities of allowing one use on the top and another use in the middle and a third use in the bottom, or that the people on the top might want to own the whole hill if they were doing it and not part of the hill, or the people in the middle might not want to have commercial use on the top, driving in and out every morning with 500 cars. And so, but of course, if we had a plan in front of us, we wouldn't have this problem. So what I thought about was, particularly with reference to getting public input, it might be useful to think of 3, I don't want to call them extreme plans, but 3 visions for the hill. The first vision, I've actually had a number of people in the last week come up and ask me, why don't we have single-family housing? And the Toll Brothers plan that we saw was unrealistic, didn't account for street use, for ledge, for the sewage system. But we might actually make up a quick plan of what the hill would look like if we had, maybe 40 units, nicely designed. We weren't trying to just totally max it out, but we were trying to build a nice single-family development on the hill. What would it look like? And then we can run through the parameters of that. Here is what the tax revenue would be. Here is, here's what the traffic load would be. Here's what the school load would be. And so people could say, all right, if we did that, and we could do that, we can revoke the 1 acre if we're writing something from scratch, and come up with a concept for a single-family development there, and the people would understand it. They would sort of say, "All right, that's what it's going to look like. That's what the net fiscal surplus is going to be," and so on. And the second option would be something like, "What if we turn this into a senior village?" What we did is we put townhouses and more expensive units on the top of the hill, and then we had 55 plus apartments, 55 plus condominiums. In the middle part, we made and then there were several points at which we could have community facilities for 55 plus. We could take the retreat house, we could take the barn, we could take the library up at the top, and it's sort of a big vision for the hill. It would obviously leave more open space, but there would be a real purpose to this development, this would be a really nice place for seniors to live. And we could have, a range of housing affordabilities, using the existing facilities, using the houses, and we could run through the numbers on that. Mm-hmm. Here's what if you went that way, here is what you would have in terms of, service usage, tax revenue, traffic allotment. And the third possibility would be sort of try and get as much commercial use as you could there. Not, strip mining and not industrial facilities. But, let's be as optimistic as possible and say some company like Self-Signaling wants to do that, and they'd build a little more at the top of the hill, and then they'd add a facility in the middle, and they'd use the original mansion as a receiving center, for visitors coming into the corporate facility. But we would just sort of, they might even allow for some demolition there of the existing buildings in the lower part. But it would be a corporate facility. And what are the advantages to doing that? What kind of tax revenue do we get? What's the traffic load? And so on. So there's 3 visions. And if I was a townsperson, I could relate to that. I could say, oh, I like this, or I don't like that, or these 2 are all right, or that's good or bad. I would feel comfortable that the people understood what each meant, and they expressed a preference to one degree or another for, some or all of the above. And then we could go back to the mosaic model and say, do we really want to, knowing what people think, do we want to divide this up? Or do we actually want to have 3 concept plans targeted to 3 audiences and see who comes in with the bids? We have a single-family development, and if that's what the people really want, and we have a commercial development, we have a senior housing development, and do we have, and they're all internally compatible. There's no incompatibilities there, right? And then do we have interested parties in implementing any one of these? And if not, we go back to the mosaic. Maybe the problem is, if we did the whole Hill Senior, that's a lot of senior housing. It would take, pretty deep pockets. You're going to take a major developer to come in and kind of think about how to do that. Maybe that's just unreasonable. So we'll do a little senior housing, and we'll do a little commercial, and we'll do a little something else, because nobody's got deep pockets to do that. But we wouldn't have one concept plan which had all these pieces to it. We'd say here are 3 ideas, and the population as a whole, the townspeople, seem to prefer this relative to that and that relative to this, and see if anybody wants to bite that apple. I certainly think in terms of the 16th of presenting ideas to the townspeople and trying to elicit their preferences, that would be much easier to understand.
Well,
End of
yeah.
End of
So
talk.
I would just respond to the single-family housing, because I think that the consultants indicated that that would generate no revenue for the town, whether
That's just so, that's a really good question. And before we would put numbers on that, it's true that single-family housing would bring the most tax revenue because the houses are bigger. So the question comes down to school load.
Right.
And we have school numbers from Patrick that he dug up 2 years ago of half a student per housing unit. We have, those numbers are so far all over the map. Plus, we have the fact that the school board is saying there's excess capacity throughout the school. Now, the problem is if I think there's such flux in those numbers that I'm not totally convinced of the prospect that single-family housing is a losing proposition. I understand the argument, but it's totally predicated on, a series of numbers that are about as squishy as you could possibly come by. In the master plan, the school committee is saying we have all this excess capacity, but we still have to spend more on schools. But the point is, if there's really that excess capacity, then the marginal cost of housing students is really quite low, and the tax revenue from larger scale houses is much bigger than it is from smaller scale houses. We could have some meeting, maybe of the school board and the planning board and the selectmen, to try and say, look, we need to know the answer to this. Come up with your best set of numbers. But right now, I don't feel at all comfortable with those numbers. I understand where Jonathan got his numbers. I understand where Patrick got his numbers from the surveys of school attendance by recently developed houses. But the problem is those numbers look like this. And I have no comfort. There's no confidence to me in those numbers.
Well, I'll further respond, and I hope everyone else wants to weigh in. But back on January 10th, we articulated a number of principles, and among them was smart growth and diversity in housing and rental and ownership options. And so what you're suggesting is really going back to the beginning.
What I'm saying is, if you gave that option to the people, right, and they all said, well, like a lot of letters we've received recently, they'll say, I moved here because it was a single-family, what does the town website say? Suburban, rural community, and, that's what I want here, and you say, all right, we'll do more of that. And
Well, I understand.
I'm
No, well, I certainly understand the simplicity of what you're suggesting. But with respect to the corporate use, if we were to say that's the only way we want to go,
I don't want, I want to say that's a way we can
A
go.
way.
A way, and I think we should be, I think everything that I've seen about the numbers is very, it's got such a wide variance, I'm not sure that it's meaningful.
well, the consultants indicated that the kind of the corporate approach was user-driven. So, and where the real estate market is, in their view, pretty much the most likely scenario in the
I totally understand that, but I don't know. I did speak to two people who've talked to two corporations, and they kind of indicated something that very early on in the conversation came up with the theological seminary, which is that if they were really going to do this, they were going to do it. They didn't want to have a section of the hill for their corporate facilities. They wanted the hill. They wanted it to be known as the Company XYZ campus. And they didn't want to be part of some, a little section of one development up at the top of the hill. And I sort of understand that. But that's not what we've been talking about. We've been talking about, putting them up in a little niche. And my guess is if some company really does come along, that may be the way they feel. And then the question will come, how does the town feel about that? And then, I think actually of the three, probably the senior is the most, likely in terms of marketability. But if you're going to really make a nice, senior hill out of it, you don't want to have this here and that there and this here, and you still have a big company up at the top of the hill. You want to have a like they do in Topsfield, a great hill. And we haven't, there's sort of three things there, and I think presenting each as a sort of, 100% extreme vision to elicit responses, maybe more informative than presenting people with a mosaic of alternatives that are really hard to understand. Even though we can sort of, think, oh, this would be a little better here than that, and this would be a little better here. I worry that it'll be a hodgepodge which no buyer will want. Any buyer will want to do the hill.
Interesting.
Well,
I'm sorry.
yeah, it's hard to respond to what you proposed. On the sort of first take is basically you would be throwing out about 10 months worth of effort and the expenditure of hundreds of thousands of dollars, not to mention hundreds of hours of time of planning board members in trying to and developing this draft bylaw that would allow many of the uses that you've described. Second, the process that you described is so indefinite. It's hard to conceive. Even you said, well, I don't trust the numbers, even though we had an independent, objective consultant go to the schools and ask for and try and get hard numbers. And you said, well, I don't trust those. They could be anywhere from here to there. Well, so how do you have an objective and intelligent and informed discussion when nobody agrees on what those numbers are? You have one opinion, the school committee and the superintendent have stated what they believe are the accurate numbers. Everybody has numbers. That's why we went out and got an independent, objective consultant to put numbers together that are the best reasonable estimates of potential development, the revenues, the costs, and the impacts on the town. Now you're sort of saying, let's throw open the door, let's come up with some concepts that could include X, Y, and Z, but maybe D, F, and G, but we don't know how those will evolve, and throw that out and let the public comment on it. Well, that's a recipe for total confusion, delay, and
you know,
not any progress. Bill,
Right.
if you
I think what we've done to date is more confusing than three very systematic and simplistic and exclusive visions saying, and then when we come back and we draft the ordinance, the overlay district, we can think about, do we make sure that the ordinance, that the overlay district allows exclusive use of the hill by any one of these three?
I think that's what we're
Alternatives.
doing here.
I think
No, we ruled certain things out. We have relegated certain things to certain uses. I
Have
don't
we
think that's true.
Tell me what we have excluded that's not in your vision.
We've excluded commercial from the middle and lower.
Single-family housing.
We've excluded commercial from the middle and lower, and we've said really that
Lower, let's take.
lowers by the,
No, but let's have a logical conversation and follow the lower is taken care of. It's, unless you flatten that and eliminate $30 million worth of value.
well, by middle, I mean,
No, I'm just saying, let's take this logically. So now we've got the middle and we've got the upper. And we've encompassed potential commercial that includes assisted, age-related living as a commercial enterprise. On the top, we've allowed potential commercial enterprise as well as housing.
housing was allowed by right? No. Special permit.
That's right. So that's the whole point here, is constructing a framework that respects the land, respects the character, but allows specific
I
uses
agree
within each
that
zone.
each of these, with the exception of single family, of course, each of the senior versus commercial options can probably be achieved within this ordinance, okay? Drafted by using a special permit here, as of right there, a special permit there, and then you can piece together either a completely commercial hill or a completely senior hill, let's call it, or a completely,
Could I just interrupt,
Yeah.
Bill? I think under our table 2, a commercial entity or an entity that wanted to do life science or whatnot could take over the entire site except for the dormitories.
except for the
Because-
what?
The dormitories. Because if you eliminate the underlying zoning district, there has to be one as of right use, and that would be the reuse of the existing dormitories. But an entity could buy the remainder of the site and do with it what they wanted, subject to a special permit. Our use table provides for that. So your third scenario is encompassed within what I think rightfully you'd term a mosaic of options, if you will. But I think that is taken care of. And then with respect to your second scenario, while I appreciate the thought that you don't want to have incompatible uses, I seriously question whether it's good public policy to have a lot of old people crammed all together in one site, to the exclusion of younger people and families and everything else, particularly if you look at our housing production plan and what the master plan is most probably going to recommend is that Hamilton provide more diverse housing stock for people who, of all different means. And as you know, and I know, if you want to buy property in Hamilton today, $1 million gets your foot in the door. I mean, there are one or two houses less than $1 million in Hamilton, and a
That's
lot more.
actually not true. Talk to the appraiser. An appraiser will tell you.
Talking about
Well,
new-
the average
I'm
house,
talking about.
the
Average house is 650.
700,000 in
$700,000.
the town warrant when the FinCom.
Yeah, average
came
house
out.
is $700,000.
But if you
That's the
look-
average.
That's the average, but if you.
That's
wanna-
also the median.
No.
It's a normal distribution, so more than half the houses are less than that.
About new housing.
So I'm
Oh, new
saying if
housing.
someone comes to Hamilton today and wants to buy a house for $700,000, good luck. There might be one or two on the market.
That's not true.
That is true.
It is
No,
true.
no,
I
no,
know
that's simply not true. There's all sorts of houses. They're not very big. They're 1,800 square foot garrisons or capes. Or there are all sorts of houses
Put it this
between
way.
$600,000 and $800,000.
I
Any
look
new
at the real estate market all the time, and I look at houses for sale, and there are very few.
So
There are
look-
only
Patrick,
about
you
10
wanna s- you
houses on the
know-
market
Look at,
total.
look at new construction. I think what we're talking about really is new construction here. And the perfect example is look at Cutler. They just built on 1/3 of an acre and one half of an acre, houses, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathrooms, and they're selling for $1.1 million. They're on a lot that is actually usable of less than a 1/4 acre because they bought swampland. So any new housing that's going up is over $1 million. So the whole point here is to try and, as Emil would say, is densify within specific areas to try and reduce the cost of new housing.
But if you densify housing with no limit on age, what you're going to get is less tax revenue and more kids in the schools. So I'm just pointing out that that is something that's kind of in conflict with what the select board is hoping to do, which is to solve the town's fiscal crisis.
Bill, we are on a track. We have constructed a carefully and thoughtful framework to have this discussion. We started out by doing an independent assessment of potential uses, dividing the property up into zones. Emil and Jonathan spent God knows how much time and effort putting very specific maps together to protect the property, respect the heritage, respect the abutters. Marnie has spent untold hours constructing a framework that allows potential uses but carefully controls them, that incorporates most of what you're saying. So I'm having a real, I understand.
I would like to hear what
Having
the
a real
townspeople
hard-
think
You're-
of
Bill,
those three
Bill,
options.
Bill, you're all, and I'm having a hard time with this. I really am, because I think it's disrespectful to all the other people in this room that have invested substantial amounts of time and effort to put together where we are now, to suddenly say, let's blow it up and let's imagine all these potential scenarios, which could or could not happen, and let's present those and see what the townspeople think. Well, you know, that's a prescription for just total confusion, because there are 5,400 voters in this town, and you want to try and figure out what 5,400 people want on that location. Well, that's a prescription for an interminable delay, and it's going to force the seminary to look at it
If
and
you
say,
give them a
"This is
huge
mess.
menu, if you
I'm
give
out."
people a huge menu of choices, like the questionnaires do, okay, then you will be creating confusion. If you just ask them, you know, to choose between 2, 3, maybe there's a fourth option that have
Ask
very
them that
different
question,
implications.
But the market is going to tell us what is most reasonable. And if you make it as complex and difficult and as confusing as you're describing, the seminary is going to look at that and say, I'm either going Chapter 40B, the entire piece of property, or I'm selling it to, supposedly they have 2 or 3 educational institutions that have expressed an interest in that property, and so we go back to where we started from.
Could others weigh in here? Patrick, did you want to say something?
A very successful local broker does a periodic evaluation with some data. Her name is Janet Brighter. Many of you are probably familiar with her. She has a report that I got earlier this month that includes both Wenham and Hamilton. There are 12 properties for sale, and the average listed price is 1.2 mil. I think that, based on Wenham being its size, our community being our size, you could say 8 communities statistically are in Hamilton, with 4 being in Wenham. But that value is still the same, 1.2 between both communities.
Jonathan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is a little bit of active listening in terms of what I think I heard you say, Bill, which is the couple things that I heard was, number one, that there's potentially internal compatibilities on the site in mixing uses. That's kind of, I think I heard that. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. And then the other thing was understandability of the package that's being presented to both the board and the public. So that's 2 points. And then the third point is kind of what the market will bear. And then the fourth point is the, some debate about house cost threshold and student cost. I don't really want to weigh in on the last one because it's too amorphous, but I do want to weigh in on the first two, which is internal incompatibility. And what's, I think, unique about this site is that there are distinct areas and zones that have natural separation. So I think it's a really unique opportunity to actually respond to the market more flexibly, because there's ways to isolate different uses. If what I heard was incompatibility of uses was a key issue. And then the other piece is that the mosaic, or the complexity of the presentation of this. And what I would say is that right now we are at our most sort of chaotic in terms of layers of information. I sort of equate it to stage blocking. You've memorized your lines, you put the actors up there, the scenery's sort of moving around. It looks like utter chaos. And there's too many moving parts, but embedded in all that work is, opening night, with clarity of roles and responsibilities and the information. I think right now we've got a lot of information in front of it. I think as it gets cleaned up and edited and presented, it'll become more distilled and more understandable. And so that's just a comment about sort of the process and what it looks like right now in terms of understandability. And I agree that the next step in this work is to simplify the information and streamline and distill it. But I would have to agree, not quite to the extent we're saying, but to a great extent, that a lot of work has been gone into this, and now's the time to sort of reap those fruits. But right now it's at its most messy. That's all.
Emil?
Yeah, where to start? First of all, you have to ask yourself, as a planning board, what is it that you're supposed to be doing in planning for the community? And yes, listening to the public is number one, but it is not the only thing. And I think that what this board has gone through from the beginning, under pressure of time, is to try to adapt pretty quickly in the demands of the owner of the property and staying flexible. Understanding what the the consultants have done in using their expertise, finding out, well, what are the potential markets on the site? The top of the hill, the middle of the hill. Listening to what they produce and looking at their work. And in the meantime, running in a parallel track, shooting for a spring deadline. Nobody thought this was going to be easy, but there was a lot of work that had to be put in a very short period of time. First of all, getting 3 scenarios done by the 16th is totally out of the question, unrealistic, and we can't do that and won't do it. And it's not going to get us anywhere, frankly, in my opinion. You know, I think we've in going through all of the discussions we've had a time to, I think, sufficient time to kind of vet out what resonates most with people, with the community, and so forth. And I agree that that I'm not absolutely sure what you mean by mosaics. I know we came up with the word, but it was really intended to be a mosaic of districts, not each with a different use, but it was for specific identifiers in each district that gave those districts specific characteristics that need to be preserved or protected in order to maintain a good project. And that was the critical part of the matrix. I think we are sufficiently covered with uses. I mean, we could open it up to other possibilities, but it's not too late for that, I don't think. But I think that might cause more concern with the general public than the way it stands right now. So I don't doubt that you're talking with people who are giving you advice about one thing or another, but I just think as hard as I've thought in this project, just think of how would I redo something, do it better the next time around, come up with a different plan, and I really cannot do it. I think that what we have is not a final product. I see this changing slightly from where we are now into something better. And I think that's going to come about after the discussions with the general public. And again, this board talking amongst itself, others, to come up with ways that could make this better, a better project. So nothing is final from our standpoint, I don't believe. I don't think anybody here thinks this is a final product by any means. And I see sufficient flexibility and yet a direction, a method that's tested, time-tested. A lot of really solid design principles went into thinking about what would a project like this actually need to accomplish it and to get to a good point on this project. And all of those, there's been so much information has not been shared here that is really the foundation for solid design work that backs up all of these decisions. Again, I cannot think of anything that I would second guess at this stage on this project. I just see the end product being such a cohesive place, even if you had a different top from a bottom, or if you had an entire buyer for the site, I think that still can be done through the special permit process. So I don't see this as, certainly don't see it as a time to put the brakes on and start over again, hoping for a September completion date. I just don't see that
No,
happening at all at this stage, unless everybody on the board felt the same way. But then that's a different matter. But I really listened carefully to what you were saying, because it matters to me to hear these things, and this is what we need to do. But there was nothing there that I felt was being precluded by going through the process that we have, and is going to continue to evolve in a way that I think is going to be significant going forward. And I think, as Jonathan was saying, it actually is going to get simpler to read toward the end. Trying to keep all the pieces together at this stage requires a lot of understanding about how the process works and where you're headed. But once it is completed, I think it's going to be a lot easier to translate into something that works very well at this site.
I mean, right now, even the illustrative plans,
Yeah.
the higher density illustrative plan is actually, if you look at it, it's a bunch of tape
Yeah.
with tracing paper on top of one another. It's layer upon layer of thinking, but not finalized. And I would say that's a good sort of analogy for what we're looking at. We're looking at layers of work and data that now need to be sort of sifted
Yeah.
through, refined, distilled, and clarified.
Right, and I can just add that this whole process that we've gone through, it started back in October, and the timeline that's now on the Planning Board's webpage will reflect this. But I know on January 10th, when we had our visioning session, Emil had a list of principles, and that was the date that we produced the map with the preferences. And those preferences, I think, address the issue of any incompatibility, because we talked about the necessity of perimeter buffers, internal buffers, the heritage landscape, the reuse of the historic buildings, and the retention of mature trees. So I think the planning board has always been sensitive to the avoidance of incompatibility with different uses. And the reason that this whole approach has been taken is to address the issues that the seminary has. I mean, they announced that they intended to sell the property about a year ago. In fact, it was almost a year to the day that they came before the planning board. But they are really adamant about flexibility, and so the whole construct here was to create a vision for the site, because the seminary doesn't have a vision for the site. And from what I understand, the development agreement is not predicated on a vision for the site. So the illustrative plans that we can present to the public as examples, not final, but they enable people to have some understanding of what that site might look like. And I think it's important that we keep that approach, keep that carrot, so that the public can be somewhat sanguine about what will happen there. And then the alternative, of course, is that any applicant can come in with any plan, and it will be reviewed with a lot of discretion afforded to the planning board to go ahead and approve it. So if there were incompatibilities, we could address that through the special permitting process. So,
So Marnie, can I share?
pardon me, no, please.
Can I share?
Yes, of course.
So I actually went through, because of that questionnaire that you sent out, which I really appreciate you like spending the time, but I went through all the emails we've gotten since the end of March, just from all the abutters, and I just wanted to pick up if there were things that were brought up that we should add to the questionnaire. And there was a number of abutters who did bring up the single-family neighborhood. And what I appreciate about what Bill brought to the table, I agree with a lot of what's been said on every side of this just now. But what I appreciate is there's going to be pushback on the potential, and he's bringing that to the table, about the single-family housing units. And so if that is I think we need to not be afraid of the process and saying this is a possibility, but I think we have an opportunity to present the cost-benefit analysis of like why this would be, why this, which I think we've talked about, but I feel like the public, we need to bring them along in that process so they want to agree and be like, oh yeah, it makes more sense not to do single-family housing. So I almost feel like Bill saying this today was like a good precursor for the meeting next week.
Right.
Because if we hadn't had this conversation, I don't know if we would be ready to hear those things. And I don't necessarily feel like we need to spend time putting plans together, but we need to say option one, and I think we've talked about this before, like we have to say the underlying zoning is this, and this is, I think it's easy in isolation to say, I'd only want this thing. But we're not in isolation. There's like the school costs of having kids in there's all these things that we've wrestled, but I don't think the public has. And I don't think we're doing them a service by just handing them the finished product. Not that we're trying to, but I think we might need to back up further than we think.
Well,
That's-
I think that to some extent, with respect to the single-family
Yep.
housing, I haven't seen this, but Jonathan did phone me, and he indicated he had some ideas for frequently asked questions. And
Yes.
so I thought that was a good idea, and I added it to the agenda to have a document produced that could answer some
So
of these
I
questions.
read that when I got
And
there,
so
yeah.
he did address the single-family housing potential. And under the subdivision control law, the planning board has responsibilities, but again, we wouldn't have the type of control over that site that we would have now. So. for
Except
exam-
with a development agreement. If we're pursuing the same,
A subdivision.
if we're pursuing the same process, we could incorporate single-family housing as one option under the development agreement. And then we could have,
Oh,
and then we
no.
could, and then we would have more power than we would.
Bill, why don't
Isn't
we
that the way
wait-
the
why don't
development
we
agreement
wait
works?
Until we hear from the public. You know, I'm really, I hear what you're saying, Bill, but I have to be really honest with you. I think it's very disrespectful. It's very disrespectful to the time and effort that many members of this board have invested in structuring a thoughtful, carefully reasoned approach and structure
I
to develop
understand
that
that.
land.
I understand
no,
that.
But listen, Bill, listen to me, Bill. You are throwing the whole process into a whole different realm that disrespects all the time and effort.
No,
and
no, no, I'm not disrespecting at all. I'm saying that we threw out single-family development right at the beginning based on a set of assumptions that are very simplistic. And once I started to get pushback on that, and I looked at the numbers, I said, you know, maybe we shouldn't have thrown out that option. And by the way, as a matter of fact, in the last 2 years, 420 houses sold in the town of Hamilton, and half of them were below $700,000. All right there, Zillow.
We're talking about new construction, Bill.
We only have, half a dozen new construction, and I agree, any developer can't afford to build $500,000, $700,000 single-family houses, but the town has a huge legacy of that development, of that kind of development, which provides a lot of very inexpensive housing in parts of the town. There are not a lot of places in Massachusetts where you can get a $600,000, $500,000, $700,000 single-family house.
I think at this juncture, though, we have to move on.
Yeah,
and-
I think we got to go take our agenda that we were supposed to be doing
Well, we're going
first.
to move to that agenda, but I think at this juncture, it may be appropriate to take a vote to move forward with the draft overlay district, and it is a draft, it is subject to change, it's subject to considerably more input from every single member of the planning board, but if the concept is one that the majority of the board can endorse, I think we should go forward with that concept and use it in very general terms for the May 16th meeting in the library meeting.
By the way, I think that the draft agreement and the concepts are terrific. I'm struggling with the fact that it allows so many things in such a mosaic that it's very hard for the public to understand the range of options.
Well, I can attest to you, Bill, that it was very hard for me drafting this because it's three-dimensional chess. You have basically a lot of different moving parts because, as you said at the outset,
Yep.
we don't have a project. So we have to try and think of all the different variables and address them in as cogent a fashion as possible. So at this juncture, I will entertain a motion to move forward if we have sufficient consensus to go with the broad outline of the draft overlay district that is in front of you right now.
So moved.
Second.
Can we add that it's subject to modification?
Oh, absolutely.
We
I
said so.
Okay,
second.
sorry,
We've said this so many times, I mean,
that's fine.
Any further discussion? No. Okay, so when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you assent to this motion? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So again, just to be clear, it is a draft. It is subject to refinement and revision, and it is definitely subject to revision based on the input that we get from the public on May 16th and again at a June hearing.
May 16th really is where we're, as I understand it, and we'll get into that more detail, we're really laying out for the public the process and how we got to where we are, and asking them some questions that you've constructed, as well as answering some specific questions about where we're going.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's kind of like setting the table.
Right. And so
Good processing.
I had a questionnaire, but before we go to that, I think Patrick included a proposed agenda for May 16th. And so when this proposed agenda, it was Emil's idea. I'm going to give him credit. He said, let's put some time frames on these things. But when I actually, did this, I used the timeline that you initiated and has led to this new webpage for the town, which I think is going to be really, really significant and really helpful. And I also looked at the memo that you did after your discussion with John Despic
Yeah.
to try and include that information in this outline. So has everybody now have the proposed agenda for May 16th? So we could easily run through it. It's pretty self-explanatory. But so definitely some opening remarks. And this, I think it's important to identify the principles that the planning board developed and how those principles are going to be reflected in the purposes of the draft overlay district. And also, to the extent possible, in any development agreement between the town and the seminary. So, and then also at that brief introduction that I would make, there would be a review of the different permitting options and a reference to the planning board's webpage and timeline. And then, Rick, if you're amenable, you could summarize the consultant's work. As you were in the working group, you could indicate the steps that the working group took, and also some of the key highlights that of the consultant's final report. Is that amenable?
That's fine.
Okay. And then at that juncture, we would turn to Emil to go through the uses and then discuss how the overlay draft is a bit of a hybrid, where there's the option to use the illustrative plan, and there are preferred uses that will get you a special permit light, and then the option to go with an applicant can use its own plan and be subject to a special permit. And of course, we do have to recognize that if the underlying R1B district is eliminated, that there has to be one as of right use on the site, and that would be the reuse of the dormitories. And then Jonathan was going to talk about the illustrative plans.
When you say illustrative plan, what are you referring to?
Oh, these plans,
Okay.
these plans.
With the
Yeah.
three types of density?
Yeah.
So, just so I understand the progression, Jonathan, are you thinking, you have the very fine last iteration of the base map that, the historic,
The zoning map,
Yeah.
the zoning,
yeah, how it's broken into about 7 different zones.
Right.
And
yeah.
I think that's, I don't know, I don't know if you're leading with that, or.
It'll be included would be included. It would tie the two together because one informs the other.
So give me a sense of what you envision illustrating and describing to the public as you step up to the microphone.
Well, Emil would just probably have talked about the various uses, and he probably would have included the zone map as well.
Use the zoning map as well, because
Yes.
that identifies locations for
Okay, so you
particular
will
uses.
introduce that,
I'll introduce
the map, okay.
Yep.
And describe how it was developed?
Yeah, that'll have launched out of the preferences.
Oh,
Jonathan will elaborate on the things like preferences, on decisions made about the site,
Within those zones,
site assets,
okay.
on the whole site.
And so where are you going?
So, so then the idea would be to present the 3 levels of density that were
Okay.
explored.
The density maps,
And yes, and those are in relationship to the zone map.
got it,
They're all tied together. They're almost one and the same.
right.
And then how those tie to the preferences and the commonalities between the 3 levels of density, because there's
Okay.
common threads and then there's differences.
Okay,
And then the other thing that I would touch on is that I was thinking of putting up on split screen the consultant's map of a particular area and our map, and just showing how we've taken that information and then take it to the next level and how we've applied the preferences to what we've drawn. So we've moved it forward. And what the differences are between what the consultant produced and what we produced, just quickly. And then I do think that in there somewhere, and I've touched on this in the frequently asked questions, I don't want to reopen the minutia discussion of what we just went through with Bill, but I do think that it's going to be important to talk about what the underlying
Right.
zone allows and how we got to where we got. I think it's important
Right.
to start at that very beginning, and that's really not quite in this agenda yet, and I think it's worth the board talking about that a little bit further. And I tried to touch on it in the frequently asked questions. And it might even be worth right now to turn to that document,
It's
if
such a
we
good
may.
document, thank you.
Can I just jump in?
Sure.
All well and good. I'm just wondering if in my presentation or my remarks about what the consultants did is just say, in addition to doing the financial assessment, David Gamble constructed these 3 very large upper, middle, and lower campuses. And then that flows into either Emil or your presentation. So it shows a progression. It started in sort of this vague, and then the planning board took it and refined it into its current condition. So I'm wondering if that, rather than sort of backing it up, it's a minor point. It's not a big deal, but I'm just saying, it would sort of help.
I guess the question would be, this is a little bit of a complex question, I don't want to get too lost in it, but previously on the website, the consultant's work and our work were sort of intermingled and not differentiated.
Right.
I think it's important at this point, at this juncture, for the planning board to acknowledge the consultant's work and then be very clear that we've now moved forward from
Okay.
it.
That's fine.
So that the public doesn't get confused.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to give one example,
No,
just
no, no.
one example.
I get it.
There's, in one of the consultant's maps, there's a parking garage right at the entrance, a multi-story parking garage right below the retreat house that will be visible from Essex Street. We've moved beyond that, and I don't want a member of the public to, for example, look at that map and say, oh my God, there's going to be a multi-story parking garage visible from across the street on Essex Street. I don't want that. I want the planning board to have sort of moved beyond those things.
That's fine.
So
Can
we
I
could,
just
we
ask-
could have, go ahead.
Would you have some pictures to show in conjunction with your presentation? Say, for example, a
Well,
pole.
what I wanted to focus on, really, I could not talk about that, but the question is whether we want to be clear about the fact that we've moved
Oh, definitely.
beyond the
Yeah.
consultant's
Yes.
work.
It's just the sequence of how you
Yes.
present.
Yes.
Yes. And what I would also like to do is not just show the maps, because that's 2D and abstract. What I want to also do is show, okay, one perfect example is the low-density solution is literally the boulders. So I can show a picture of the courtyard and the boulders, and then the courtyard on the map. Here's what this plan might look like. So it's very specific. In fact, it's not even a drawing, it's in real life. So the idea is to have this thing as visual as possible.
Right.
So it's not about abstract coding or zoning or process or minutia. It is, here's quickly how we got here, and this is an example of what this thinking looks like.
Yeah. No, I think that's great.
Okay.
I think that's what John Despic was asking for. He said, I think it would be really helpful for the public to understand how that evolved and the detail and thought that went into creating each zone and how they relate to each other I think that's critical because it's really going to get to the heart of how we got to where we are.
Right.
It really shows a great deal of time and effort put into that.
So the other thing, my personal focus is I feel like there's a number of misapprehensions and myths out there that would be helpful to dispel. And that's what I tried to focus on in the frequently asked questions. For example, the term density.
Right.
The term density
Oh, yeah.
is such a loaded word.
Yeah.
And I tackled that, and I need more to do more work in the frequently asked questions. And what I want to do is I want to actually add a diagram as a place on. I want this to be a single-page handout, double-sided. And under density, what I'd like to do is actually even make some cartoon diagrams that show the principle that differentiates sprawl with no usable open space from more compactness that still creates a nice place that people want to be, but then also buys you open space. So with the same number of housing units, but open space. And I can do that very, very simply, literally in this empty spot on this document where I've only used 1.5 pages for the handout.
Will you have that as?
So that'll be in the handout, and it'll also probably be up on the screen.
That's my question, yeah.
So one of my big missions is to dispel the fear of density and explain how it's your friend. It buys you open space. It buys you a place to walk your dog.
Well, I think
Single-family houses
Oh, yeah.
on that hill.
No, I
You love
could-
walking your dog, you love riding your bike, you can say goodbye to all of that.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's the argument against single-family housing up there, is that it just eats up.
But it's a choice.
it
It's a
eats
choice.
It is a choice.
It's a choice.
It eats up space.
Right. So, but what I think is useful, to Bill's point, is rather than sailing by it, it would be useful to talk about it, acknowledge it, educate,
Right.
and then move past it and let people see it and
No, I think
understand
that's
it.
an excellent idea.
So that would be a focus in my portion of the presentation, plus a focus in finishing up the frequently asked questions.
So I have a question on the frequently asked questions.
Yeah, I would love any feedback
Well,
people want to
I loved it because I have like 3 pages of notes for the meeting and just the questionnaire. But this is so great because this is answering a lot of the things that I wrote down.
It's right from the letters.
It's so good.
It's right from the
Exactly.
letters.
So that's why it's just, I loved it when I saw it, so I really appreciate you putting the effort in there. My question is, when would we hand this to people? Because
It'd be at the
handouts can be a distraction,
Right.
or
At
it
the
can be
door.
helpful.
That's
Right at the door.
that's what I was thinking is, I wouldn't go with the handout. You could have it on a table.
It's not going to be it should be at the door.
Yeah,
People pick it
can
up when they
take
come
it,
in.
But it would disrupt your presentation to stop and I'm handing this
Right,
out.
or
No, at the door.
sometimes you want to give it at the end so they're not looking at, it depends. I mean, there's a whole strategy on when you give a handout because otherwise they're not listening to the presentation. So we could have them there and ask people to come early if they wanted to like peruse the handouts,
Or
but
hand it out at the end.
or hand it out at the end. I just have a lot of those kind of little details that I think can make our meeting more helpful.
The thing about the handout at the beginning is that this could answer 50% of what
Correct.
comes up at the podium.
That's why it should come out before the question period, because, that would be a good time, I think, to talk about it, because I think it's going to be the most valuable
Well, I was thinking
it's
we
gonna
should deal with
stimulate
the
other-
objections first
gonna-
thing.
It's going to stimulate other questions.
When is the questionnaire going out?
I have I
So
actually,
there's a very detailed questionnaire that presumes that the people attending know much more than I think they do.
Well,
It asks them, let me finish, it asks them about particular features of the plan, would they like a little more of that? And they haven't even seen the plan much, and you know, it's, I would have a questionnaire that, you know, cuts right to the heart of the matter and says something like, you know, what uses would you prefer to see as the dominant uses in the Hill? You know, single-family units, clustered senior housing townhouses, clustered apartments and condominiums, commercial, life sciences facilities. And just see what they say. I mean, that's, but I'm still wondering in my own mind, is that something we want to say as they go out to do it? Want them? The problem is, they're not going to be able to answer it and drop it off at the same time. I guess we have to give it to them at the
No, you
beginning.
do not want to get into a public discussion about preferences. You want them to fill out the survey and leave it with us so that we get that feedback.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, but I'm saying, do we give them the questionnaire when they come in, or is they're filling it?
Well,
I have a thought on the questionnaire.
One of the problems,
One of the, okay, go ahead.
let me just say that.
Yeah.
One of the problems with the questionnaire is if we get the public arguing with each other about this, our time
It
is just
blows
going to
up.
disappear.
It just blow up the
Correct.
whole thing.
It's going to blow up the whole thing. So the questionnaire is good or bad. I think we're going to have to sort of read between the lines and just pick up the information at the end. But that's why I like the frequently asked questions. That's going to raise very specific questions that people need to think about, and I think that's going to be what stimulates the questions.
So when would you do it?
I would hand it out during the course of after the
Uh,
presentations. So now you have roughly half the meeting left, 40 minutes. People
Okay.
can fill them out, and then at the
Okay, so you
end-
have the presentations, and then you hand out the questionnaires and say, we want your opinion.
Correct.
And they'll understand a little more.
Yeah.
Having been through the presentations, I think that's fine. But I would make it
Yeah.
an incredibly more simple questionnaire.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I mean, this was stream of consciousness, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
I sat down at the computer
Okay.
and just started.
Well, and it's good because we have a place to start from, so I
place to start. So
appreciate that.
I-
So what I was thinking, though, was I was wondering if at certain points when there's a certain question, so if they already had the questionnaire, and we're talking about, like, I think it was like question 12 was talking about the different districts, that we could be like, this part of what we're talking about at the meeting actually relates to question 12. So they can have it in there, no?
I would-
Okay.
I know where you're going, but I would say, but it gets to your whole point about don't just stop the presentation and get them focused on, because then they're going to go to the
Right,
question.
I'm just trying to, because there's so much information.
But I get it. I think the questionnaire, as somebody said, either has to come after the presentation, halfway through, because you got to lay the foundation. You
Right,
got to
right.
lay the
I
foundation.
think after the
Yeah,
presentations.
yeah. You got to lay the
Or
foundation.
if we have like a exhibit list, then we could say, see exhibit whatever, and they could, no? Okay, I just think some people are gonna be like, Browns Hill Overlay District, what one was that? I'm trying to go
That's why-
back to
that's
an
what I'm-
average
That's why
person.
I'm suggesting this. Keep it really simple.
Simple, okay.
We're
But why don't-
painting a
Well, I'm
pic-
also.
Yeah,
I'm also
one
hoping-
page, what uses, maybe what concerns you noticed. Just a couple things that we can gauge priorities from.
The other important thing is to let people know there's going to be another meeting shortly afterwards, a second meeting for feedback. Because now they have a period of time between the presentation and the following meeting to come up with ideas or comments, and they could do it online, presumably.
Well, I was wondering if we would have some kind of online ability for people who either came to the meeting or weren't able to come, for them to fill out a questionnaire.
Right, why don't we go through the questionnaire?
Perfect.
Because,
So can-
again, I recognize that it was very complex and probably too complex. But I tried to get everything in there.
No, it was great.
Easier to take it out than put it
Right.
back in.
No, that's great. I think I just want, one thing that John did bring up during our conversation is, and I think will be helpful, and I don't know where this is going to occur, is we're throwing around terms like special permit, overlay district, by right,
GPOD,
GPOD. People don't know what those
Correct.
mean.
That's me, right
Okay,
out of the box.
So that wasn't clear in here, so And I'm wondering if it should go,
Should we do a sheet with key terms or something? What do you think?
you could do that. I'm just wanting to know, it's context at this point, because we're introducing the group. We're having a conversation to lay out the process, this is not a criticism. I'm just wondering if defining terms up front is kind
Yes.
of like, whoa, where does that fit?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that fits as an individual that knows nothing. How does that fit into the presentation? So I'm wondering where,
So what I'm a big fan of, and you can kind of see it in my FAQ format, is trying to write to somebody who really hasn't done their homework. They haven't gotten into the detail. They're just stepping in from outside. And what can you convey in a short amount of time? And my suggestion would be to keep it as simple as possible, keep it as untechnical as possible. The people who want to know what the GPOD is will go research it, but the rest of them just want to hear kind of the results, the recommendations, what does it look like?
how about would it make sense to have a definition, just sheet on the background and just one sentence of what those are?
You could have that, but there's kind of a principle. Anybody know Edward Tufte's work? You know who Edward Tufte is? Sort of the grandfather of information design. I mean, his religious principle is one page, double-sided for
Oh, yeah,
anything that's,
no,
anything that's
I
handed out.
subscribe to that. I was just responding
So-
to John's question, is that these terms are being thrown around and people don't have any context to know what they
Right.
I
mean.
mean, I guess you could do,
It
just
doesn't
to,
have to
we
be-
could overwhelm them with, pieces of paper.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I think first go around, I think.
all right, we'll leave it.
it's simple.
Because it's it's a concept, and that's not easy to.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that
I think you can say the same thing in simpler language.
I'll try,
We're trying to-
in this introduction, just indicate that as of right is exactly what you would think. It doesn't require any permitting. At most, it might require some modest level of scrutiny, but an applicant that has that designation, it's a go. They get the building permit. And then I have to distinguish between what we're calling special permit light and special, and we do need different terms for that. So if you can come up with something,
Well, I think it
Tell
gets
me.
to, I think it gets to Jonathan's point is, I'm wondering if you don't even want to bring that up, right?
well, I could just say special permit, which involves some level of discretion by the planning board.
Could I suggest a different word? Is a special permit allows the planning board to have a oversight and control of the development process?
Perfect.
So that, I think that's one of the concerns. One will be that it's done restricted and it'll explode into something that people don't want. And the second one will come later. Oh, the planning board will have control. So, I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't,
Okay,
but.
so we'll make it real simple. We won't we can say we're going to differentiate
can
in the
say-
process, but the central theme is the planning board will have oversight and control of the development process. Got
Or you
it?
could say it can be approved or denied,
Right.
whereas an as of right cannot be denied, but it
I
can
think
be
that as far as you want to go.
That's as far as you want to go, yeah.
Right.
Okay, no, good.
Okay, so the other thing, Marnie, I'll write up a questionnaire for you. Can I do it? Economists are very good at this.
Oh.
You can't ask people whether they agree or disagree. You have to ask them to either do an ordinal or cardinal ranking so that you actually learn something, okay? The first part of the question is great, and I will
Well,
just
let's
come
go
up with
through the
5 or
questions.
6 things.
Let's go through the questions, and the
Okay.
ones that are okay, we'll check. And the ones that have issues, Bill, your contribution would be fabulous, because I think at the last meeting, I said there are PhD sociologists that do questionnaires, and I am neither a sociologist nor a PhD.
Okay, so let's go through, the first 6 are fine. Now you get to 7. Do you agree?
Wait, can I comment on 2 through 5?
Okay.
I'm thinking you can just say, have you attended any of these meetings, and just to save space, abutters with consultant, abutters with seminary, abutters with only with other abutters. Just like a quick list instead of, it's just a lot of space with a lot of questions,
I don't
which are actually asking the same thing.
Well, no, because we want to know about people other than abutters.
Well, I'm saying take those questions 2 to 5 and just say, have you attended any of the following meetings? And then just list them instead of having different questions, because then they have to read the whole question over again. I'm just looking to be more effective with like being able to quickly
Yeah,
just
you
go
could-
through
you
that.
could
Do you know what I'm
streamline
saying?
that.
Yeah, I just felt like that would help streamline it.
You know what? If you have a suggestion, send it to me.
Okay, I will. I got lots.
Number 7, do you agree with the following principles? Yes. They're all good things. Are you asking them 7 questions to put a yes and a no to each one?
No,
Or are you saying, do you agree with all 7?
The following.
I'm not trying to be mean to you, okay? But
Yeah, you're being mean to me. The following 7 guiding principles.
Well, and then I saw it differently. I was like, maybe you have people circle the guiding principles that are most important, and the ones they disagree with, they could add.
And you ask them to rank them.
And then they could add additional comments to say why they agree and disagree. But if there was any,
That's too much. I would just say, order these in terms of most importance, 1, 3, 6, whatever they do. But I'm not even sure, agreeing with things, everybody agrees with everything. I mean, there's few things, it's just not it doesn't force them to make choices.
Well, that's the
That's
problem
right.
with all
That's
surveys, right?
Well, but unless you write the survey,
Right,
that-
unless you say, do you like
or, either or.
better or worse?
Better or worse, right.
Well,
So, and then the same thing with 9. Do you agree with the following principles? Yes.
these were our preferences, stated 2 ways. So,
Well, again, am I giving a yes to each one of the 7?
no, to all of them.
Well, of course I agree with all of them. They're all good things.
Right, that's what we're.
So, but that's
the
not
way I
what we're
designed
trying
the
to do.
question.
What we're trying to do is find out what is most important or least important in terms of these priorities, because they're trade-offs.
What if they like 6, but they don't like 7?
right, that's why I was kind of getting at the circle the ones or
Right.
comment
So,
on-
I mean, and 12 is,
Wait, so let's back up. If we're going to do this over again, if we're going to do this, are you saying rank the following guiding principles 1 through 7?
I'm not even sure I'd have that. I think I probably just cut questions 7 and 9 out, 7, 8, and 9. And never ask if, no, why, because that's something they need to take home and think about, and only 10% will actually respond with a real answer. So I would just,
All right, take them all out. And then 12.
and then 12,
Let me just, would you substitute the 3 that, environment, social needs?
Actually, I think.
yeah, I mean,
actually wanna-
if you wanted to take 3 or 4 things and say, what do you think is most important? Rank these.
Yeah.
1, 2, or 3, 4. You could do that.
Yeah.
So like 9, you would say rank the following proposed purposes?
Yeah, 1 is most important to you, 7 least. But you don't want to have a question that says, encourage the use of illustrative plans. Everybody's going, everybody's going to do that. Balance fiscal, social, of course you're going to balance it. That's not the question. It's how important do you think environmental concerns are relative to fiscal, relative to social,
That's a really good question. I like that question.
right?
Yeah.
Choose between those.
Rank these.
Rank them.
Are they 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or
No, is it 1, 2, 3, or 3, 2, 1?
Yeah.
1, 1, 1?
No, can't, no, you're not allowed to have ties.
Well, but the right way to do this is you balance them. They're each equal in weight. There's
You-
33.3333%. throwing a wrench in your strategy here, but,
I think actually ranking is better.
okay.
Okay, why don't we just rank them with one being the most important?
Most important, 7 the least. Except, but the other thing is, it's really, I think each item should not be general and amorphous. It should be very specific and concrete. What do you want to know? Not, do you support some very general, good guidelines. So the first one, support land uses that will promote economic development in the site, allow phased development, activities that reflect traditional campus. I mean, that's just a huge question. You sort of, sure. I mean, I'm not even, it's not specific. It's so general that I'm not sure people can compare that to 2. Retain heritage landscapes. If you said, 1 was promote economic development to maximize tax revenue, and then 2 is retain existing structures of historic importance, then that sets off a trade-off. Oh, wait a minute, do I value the environment more than I value economic development?
Well, again, these are the purposes that I set forth in the draft overlay district bylaws, so,
But I agree with all those principles, and I hope everyone else is. What we're trying to do is not give people something that they agree with, but to force them to express their views, to choose.
well, why don't we just ask them to rank them? Because,
Or you could just say circle the most important, 3 most important. or-
oh, that's a good idea. Circle.
There we
with
go.
Thank you. Does that work for you?
I
We were
still think it
hoping-
needs to be streamlined, it's just too many concepts.
Yeah.
If we could get this,
Right, because I think originally we had there were 3 basic
Yeah.
principles.
Oh, no, actually, the guiding principles are in number 7.
They evolved.
I mean, the thing is, nobody is going to disagree with the guiding principles, because we came up with the guiding principles to be very inclusive and things that everybody would agree with. So we're not going to learn much if we ask them, do you agree with our guiding
actually, I
principles?
put this
I
in.
certainly hope so.
Aspect added, ask what were the guiding principles?
Well, right, and I think that's why, I think that in your opening section,
That could go in there. So
That-
then Bill's probably right. We can take all these questions out.
well, I think you're right. But I think your point, though, on your opening section is
Put that in
the
there.
principles.
Okay.
The question, and you could just say, we've got a lot of questions, and tonight we're going to, and I think that hopefully in your opening remarks is sort of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then we tell them what we tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. It's,
Marnie, we have an electronic copy of this?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you allow me to make a,
Oh, go, please.
Okay.
Please. I never
Okay.
purported to be,
okay.
I
There are some
actually-
fundamental Nobel Prizes in understanding people's preferences
I'm
and
sure
how,
there
and
are.
how to elicit them.
I
Okay, I'll try and use just a couple of those
No,
ideas.
please, but I set
Okay,
it up
okay.
so that people would agree with
Okay.
us. So I'll be candid.
Okay.
I wanted to try and develop consensus that way, but if this is,
Right.
I have violated.
Okay, I will,
so
that's my task,
skeptical.
that's my task this week.
But let's go through them and see if there are any, though, that we
I just
should
want to,
keep.
I just wanted to reiterate what Rick just said about, because I had that down as one of my notes, is to tell them at the very beginning, like a one line, where we're going. We're going to tell you where we've been, where we are in the process, and where we're headed, like what's.
Where we're going.
Yeah, what's in the future. So like, we have public hearings, it goes to town meeting, you guys make the choice, obviously. I mean, I think it's important for us to say, it's not worth drafting anything if we don't have your agreement. I mean, these are, I think
And
some of these
I
basic
think putting the questionnaire
conversations.
after the presentation, so people get a flavor for.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the
What's going
questionnaire,
on?
I was just talking about the whole presentation. Rick had just said, tell them,
I think that's critical Marnie, is setting the table for them.
Yes.
Because I think, this is actually, this is exciting, because and Jonathan, I like your reference, it's opening night. It's really opening night. A lot of people have complained they've gotten bits and pieces of information, misinformation, rumor, hearsay.
It's a dress rehearsal. It's a dress rehearsal open to the public.
Right, well, this is
Not
off-
opening night.
It's off, yeah, dress rehearsal, or it's off Broadway, I don't know which one. But I think this is an exciting opportunity, and just say, we recognize our responsibility to inform the public about what we've been doing for the last 10 months. Tonight's goal is to share with you the process and events that have occurred, so we can lay a foundation for people to have an understanding of where we're going. And that leads to the principles. And just say, the principles we've developed in guiding our process are these principles. And that's what we're working on. That's the whole premise of our efforts, and we will endeavor tonight to share with you how we've done that.
Okay. So let's go back to the questionnaire. So any questions that you liked, Bill, or are they all violative of?
So my question is, what's the, I know this is probably late in the game, what do we want to accomplish with these questions? When we get these back,
I'd like to answer that.
good.
So ultimately, what we really need to do, we're not going to get a number and we're not going to get a yes or no answer, but ultimately what we need to do is get our finger on the pulse of the comfort level of what level of intensity, density, or compactness the public will embrace on this site. That's ultimately what we need here.
Yeah, that's the biggest
That's
goal.
and we're not going to get that in a number. We're not going to get in an up or down vote. We're going to get, well, the best I can say is finger on the pulse.
Just remember, you're asking this question of a very select group of individuals, most likely populated by the abutters first and foremost.
Understood?
Yeah, but if
So-
we know who that is, we can take the questionnaires and we can put them into two piles.
Yes.
We
So,
can tabulate up the abutters and we can tabulate up the non-abutters.
Yep.
And that will be very, very informative.
Yes, all of that's informative.
yeah.
And so you're not going to get a binary answer out of it.
No, I just,
There's no binary information in here, period. So it's all going to be very nuanced, and we have to
Right.
be detectives and figure out what the lay of the land is.
Okay, Bill, based on your comments, I'm thinking that questions 1 through 6 are okay, although they could be reorganized. And we should probably then skip all the way to,
Well, there are little snippets. In other words, I think I would, since I'm trying to elicit preference, I'd probably take, item number 9 from, 7 from 9 and compare it with 12 from 3. And try and keep it to 2 pages, so it's a one-sheet thing.
Can I
I
offer-
agree with that.
Can I offer a suggestion here? Rather than doing this all together, would it be possible for the two of you to somehow work together to sort of refine this? I mean, it seems like Bill has some experience doing
right,
questionnaires, and as the chair, what our mission and goal is. Could we allow for the two of them to
Yeah, I'd support that.
collaborate on that, please?
right. And,
We just don't have time
yeah,
anymore.
we don't
Yes.
have time to do
Okay.
this,
Fine.
to go through it. So
That's a good suggestion.
Bill, did you have issues with asking specifically about 55-plus housing
What
or
I'm,
any of these other
what I'm
things?
saying is we take this
No,
offline.
I would, yeah, let's take this
Okay.
offline. That's a fundamental question. I mean, maybe there's a lot of people in town who say, well, we've got 55-plus housing going up over here, we voted it down over there. Maybe we've had enough 55-plus.
All right, you send me,
I mean, you have to allow that to come out in some way.
right. And since you have expertise in this, I mean, the real issue here is
I will get a draft to you early in the week, and then we can sit down
Okay.
and work with it, okay?
Okay. And the intent here is try and get some assessment of what scale of development people are comfortable with.
It's what scale, what
Right.
uses,
The uses are.
how important do they consider the, you know, the environmental impacts like traffic and lighting to be, or obviously the
Well,
the
there
abutters are gonna be very
I
concerned.
did say
Right.
rank your concern. That one might be the one question, the very last question, that might have met your standard. What concerns do you have? Rank them.
And,
But-
and probably the length could be shortened. to
Oh, yeah, no.
Maybe half.
Oh, sure, yeah. I just took a stab at
No,
it.
no, no.
No, yeah, it was great.
I'm just saying,
Oh, no, the first question I looked at was 28, and I said, oh, I could change this around. And now I think what we want to do is have that be the model for the other couple of other questions we're going to answer, okay?
No, I'm very comfortable. I don't pretend to have expertise in
the question
questionnaire
then
writing.
is, once you have the final, do you want to put it online or do some kind of town survey?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
So-
Because they did
so-
it for, didn't they do that for the master plan? They had a survey that you could,
Yeah, and
and,
that kind of, the questions on the master plan were, I think, a little problematic in some
Oh,
respects.
God, the debate went on for months about the questions.
I remember filling out the questionnaire, and I was like, what?
Yeah, and after all that work, it was like, where did this come from?
I mean, I couldn't answer the questions. I mean, I didn't know
Oh, it
whether
was
one
like-
was more important or 10 was more important. I mean, it was like, so yes, we're going to defer in large part to
So,
our professor emeritus here.
so are we done with the questions? Because you guys are gonna take it offline and
Yes,
come up with
yes, we're
something?
done with the questions. We're done with the questions. So, so the idea was after the presentation, after Jonathan has
That's sort
done,
of what comes next.
we're going to distribute the questionnaire.
Okay.
And Beth, could you be responsible for that?
I can.
Thank you.
So, and then you're giving them what, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to?
Oh, at the very end, we're going to stop early. We have a hard stop at what, 7:45?
Yep,
So at 7,
30.
yeah, or thereabouts, we'll stop and let people fill out the
When are we
questionnaire.
starting?
6:30,
Okay,
Patrick?
that's good, actually, because you
I thought
6
we
or
were starting
6:30?
at 6:30. Have we?
Isn't,
We haven't formalized an agenda.
I think 6:30 is good, because it's really gonna
Yeah.
force us to be efficient.
Yeah, well, that's why I had times for each of these things.
we have 50 minutes for one section, so I don't think we're gonna have to change that.
So, I haven't
wanted to
read,
allow
I
good
haven't
time
read
for
the entire agenda. Do we have a question and answer period in here?
Oh, yeah, it's on the
A
back.
5, 10,
Um,
25,
So on the back,
30.
so I thought, rules for participation so that if there are a number of people, that no one person monopolizes the microphone. So I would announce the rules, which is please limit your questions or comments to 2 or 3 minutes. And
No, not 2 or 3.
How many?
I'll give the.
Oh, question
no
can be
more-
short.
No more than,
2?
yeah, I mean, because, and you'll have a hard time enforcing that.
Well,
We're going to have a time, we need a
Enforce it.
timekeeper. So-
Can you be the timekeeper?
Oh, yeah, right.
No, seriously.
Uh,
And we need a
I'm
timekeeper.
happy to be the timekeeper, and if you need me to facilitate, because I'm used to facilitate, I've done that before. If you want me to do that part, Marnie, whatever you want.
Well,
That sounds
because-
like a good idea.
Well, plus I'm not gonna add a lot because I don't have the expertise you all have, so I'm not gonna get in the weeds. It's just, but it's up to you. But I want to say, I just tallied everything up until that section where we say we're gonna have 50 minutes for public discourse. We're at 45 minutes. If we start at 6:30 and we're gonna end at 7:30,
No, we're at 7:45.
but we said at 7:30 we're gonna stop so they can fill out the survey. That gives us an hour. So we already have 45 minutes allocated, assuming everyone stays on track. We
right.
start on time.
Part of the
So we're
timekeep-
not gonna have 50 minutes for that one section. That's all I'm bringing to the table.
Well, I thought we had the,
Right here, it says, 50 minutes for the facilitating public discourse.
And we don't have enough, we don't
We have
have,
45, everything added up before that is 45 minutes. So if we start at 6:30, that brings us to, and we're on time, that brings us to 7:15.
well, I thought we were out, we have to be out of there at
7:40.
no
no,
later than-
7:45, right?
Well, you have to be wrapping it up because they shut down at 8. The facility shuts down at 8.
Right, and I thought we would be done at 7:45.
So if that, and then do the
We've got
questionnaire?
some slide time, because remember when we did the Mass Works,
Yeah.
we took it right up to the
Yeah.
7:55. And they were,
Right, so if-
they were turning off lights and closing doors as people were exiting.
I just want to make sure, I thought somebody said 7:30, we're going to stop to fill out the questionnaire. That's all I'm saying. I'm just
Yeah.
following up with the timeline.
Yes, yes. I
So
think
that only gives 15 minutes for the public discourse.
Oh, that's not enough.
Well,
that's-
yeah, that's true.
So that's why I was wondering if we should start at 6.
Let's start at 6.
Well,
Is that too early?
There's a lot of ground to cover, so.
you're cutting into people's, who are,
Yeah.
do commute and who have families, who have to feed their families.
Okay, then I'm going, well,
6:15?
I think you can leave 20 minutes for questions and answers, and that's plenty. I mean, because the questions will get repetitive.
Yeah.
And then we'll just have time for questions the next time.
Yeah, and
Great.
this is just the beginning.
But I just wanted to make sure we were good.
No, I think that's the important thing to emphasize. This is the beginning of a very public process. There'll be multiple meetings where we drill down into the details and answer questions, and we look forward to those questions. So I think that gets to Jonathan's point about keeping this simple. People will want to get into the nitty-gritty. Well, what are you going to do with the septic system? Well, we can't answer that question right now. Or, what if, I don't know, what if cell signaling wants to build on this section? And we're going, well, that's taken care of in the bylaw. These are very good questions. We've thought about these, and, we'll be having public hearings to discuss those in very much detail, but we can't get into that there. We'll just descend into rat hole.
So the timekeeper's role would also be to keep the presenters on time as well.
Oh, yeah.
So not
I
just the,
can't,
not just
I
the
don't
public,
see
so the
myself using
timekeeper.
5 minutes. Maybe 3 minutes is enough for me.
and I'll try and do, as short as possible. And Beth, if you have experience as a facilitator, that's fabulous, and Rick, if you.
I mean, I don't really care either way. I'm just saying, I'm
No, but
like,
If you have experience.
I don't mind that.
It's really just, kind of keeping people to the rules
Correct.
and directing the question to the appropriate party, and I think.
And keep us moving along.
And I think most of the questions, I suspect, will be directed to Emil and Jonathan. Do you think so?
Probably.
So-
you.
Or me? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll try and revise this a little bit, this agenda, and then I'll send it to Patrick, and he can then forward it to all of you. And the alternative is, if you have comments with respect to this agenda, you could forward them to me. Can people do that, Patrick, without violating the open meeting law? You could forward your suggestions about amending this agenda
Okay.
to me. I'll try and synthesize them, and then I'll send a final product to Patrick.
Great.
Bill is going to revise the questionnaire, and we will get that to everyone as quickly as possible as well.
A basic item on the agenda is that the FAQ would be handed out at the door. So right now it's at the end, it would be at the very
Oh,
beginning.
right,
Yeah.
yes,
FAQ at the
go the other
beginning.
route.
yes.
So we're going to do the, and what else are we passing out?
The FAQs are at the door, and the questionnaire is after Jonathan's presentation. And so I have here provide a brief summary of the material covered, indicate that the draft has not been finalized. I don't think I need to summarize anything. I'll just indicate that nothing is final until we synthesize the information that we receive from the public and have a follow-up meeting to further dive into the issues that are raised, right?
And we have some questions there. I don't know if we want to read those. I can't see them.
I can't read.
Let's see, the bottom question, I'll read it. According to Mr. Mitchell, speaking right now, you won't be able to answer that question. I think that was with respect to septic. Why not? Who can then and when? Waste of time. If I bring it up next week and you won't answer it, can you bring the question to the group offline? Actually, the answer to the question is that septic systems have to meet state DEP standards, not this planning board standard.
That's
Right.
correct.
State standards that are
Right.
administered by the Board of Health
Right.
up to a certain size, and then the state after that.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
right.
And
There's
I,
a lot of confusion
Yes.
over that.
and I spoke with David Smith, who's chair of the Board of Health, and he confirmed that it is the state DEP who is responsible for that septic system. And the other thing he indicated to me is that, and it's something I've been focused on, still no answer, is how this campus will be organized if multiple entities purchase property there. And John Witten said this, and David Smith said this. If there is a shared septic system, it cannot be managed by a condominium association. It has to be managed by a single entity, so that if there were multiple owners on the property, they would have to have some type of contractual agreement with an entity that was approved by the DEP to manage the septic system. So, under any kind of special permitting, we can't issue a special permit unless the health and safety issues are resolved, and certainly a workable, well-maintained septic system is a requirement. It's not just a requirement of a special permit, it's required by the DEP. So to
That
some
may,
extent,
that may
would-
ultimately be what scuttles the multiple uses,
Yeah, and
which is that none of the uses want to be part of the other guy's
Yeah.
septic system, and
Right.
they want to control their own destiny, and there may or may not be room for 3 separate systems, and
and my comment was not that we're not going to answer the septic question. That was an example of the level of detail that could end up taking time from other people who have general questions. My point was, there are going to be many public meetings where we can get into the minutia about septic systems and about protection of the wetlands and protection of abutters and screening and noise and lighting. That's all I wanted to get into. We can't get into infinitesimal detail at this meeting. That's not the time or place to do
Well,
it.
and we also haven't answered the questions among ourselves on
Right.
some of
That's
these issues.
that's my point
But, you
is,
know, what we want to do is present the overall concept of what the planning board is thinking about.
Right.
And the details are yet to be finalized, and as John Witten always says, the devil is in the details. But the septic system is of critical importance, and again, the DEP is the responsible agency for overseeing that system. And just I throw this out, but the development agreement could contain something to the effect that an engineer evaluated that system, and I know the consultant said the boilers are old, 75 or 80 years old, and so the utility of that system is open for debate and how much capacity it has.
You can see how much time we've consumed just
Yeah,
discussing
just on
this
this,
question.
exactly,
We will have used
exactly.
up our entire question and answer
Okay,
session.
So,
Yeah, there's another query about parking lots, new accesses, egresses.
and those, again, those are all to be determined. But we're sensitive to parking lots, and the bylaw will address parking in some level of
Right.
detail. And certainly, this planning board is aware of cars and the lights that they project at night and how they might interfere with the butters. And so we're looking into all these things, and by no means are we just going to put parking lots willy-nilly on this site.
Mr. Barnes has a comment. I would like to suggest that a unscientific questionnaire is much worse than no questionnaire at all. It will create the impression that you are collecting quantitative data when you're only collecting a very small sampling of qualitative data.
Bill, can you address that?
Quantitative data is easier to analyze than qualitative data. And we also will have a couple of questions that indicate who the respondent is, whether he's in a butter, and that will help us to weigh the importance or the differences in the quantitative answers. We'll learn more that way. Won't be perfect, but we'll learn more.
I think the other part of this is not a definitive end-all document that suddenly becomes tabula rasa. It's just one aspect of collecting data from the public. We are going to get much more input from the public meetings, in-person public meetings we have. So it's going to be a continuing process.
It's a continuing process, yes. But Dr. Barnes, I think that that Dr. Whitten is well up to the task of amending my, what is now apparently an egregious questionnaire, except for the first 6 questions. So don't be alarmed. It will be much improved. Anything else?
Those are all that we've
That's it?
gotten.
Yeah, I think this gets to.
Jake Mr. Fumar had a comment. He was at the podium for a while earlier tonight.
Sure. I'm Jake Fumara. I live at 139 Essex Street, so right across from the main entrance. I've heard a lot of stuff, and I'll be sure to use my 120 seconds of my first public input hearing next week. But a couple things. One is, using the word disrespectful for Professor Wheaton's comments is a little crazy, first of all. A lot of what he said resonated with me as someone who lives across the street, and someone, I know you spoke to some real estate agents and things like that. I'm a mildly successful real estate developer, mostly in Cambridge and San Francisco and New York. But, you know, I moved into the neighborhood obviously for a reason. And I actually looked back, had an email from Rick Mitchell on September 26th, asking to talk with me, and we talked, and he had asked me to join what I thought was a small group of people that never materialized. I followed up with Rick on January 4th. January 18th, he got back to me and said, there's a public meeting on January 26th, you should attend. So my input has been little to none. I know that a lot of my neighbors feel pretty much the same way. And I think that scare tactics like it's going to be a 40B, you're going to wipe out $30 million worth of value in buildings on the lower section is lunacy and really frustrating to hear.
No, it's based on fact.
The $30 million for which buildings, Rick?
The 109 units of residential.
That's worth $30 million. Okay. So
Perhaps 20 or 25, but it is actually, the newer apartments are fairly valuable.
either way, my point would be, when I look at this, everyone keeps saying there's this pressure of time. And now I heard tonight that there's 2 potential offers to the seminary from educational uses. I would love to see an educational use there. It's great.
The town would not like to see that.
You're speaking for all the town members.
I'm speaking for the people that have to make financial decisions for this town. Another nonprofit, non-taxpaying.
So let me ask you something else, Rick. The 500,000 square feet of commercial uses, that you think will be cell signaling coming in, where else do you think that would come from?
I never made a statement that 500,000 square feet of cell signaling would be there.
I would just, the 500,000 square feet came from the consultant's report. But anyways, trust me, there's plenty of real estate brokers that live in town. I know that Cushman Wakefield is now supposedly going to list the property this summer, so I'll talk with them as well. You can do a zoning overlay. I mean, geez, I have 5 acres across the street, include me in it too. Because maybe I could be part of the zoning overlay as well and get my property to be worth more. I don't understand why there hasn't been an effort to say, how much is the property worth today? And then how much more it goes for? And then what's the contribution from the seminary to the town for that, for creating that value? There's been a lot of talk about raising revenue for the town, but no one said, what is that contribution going to be? And I don't understand when that's supposed to happen.
I think that's a very good question that a number of people are thinking about and exploring, because I agree wholeheartedly with you that if we do an overlay district there, we create an immense new value for the seminary. So the question is, how does that benefit the town?
I just want to add one part to your sentence. You create an immense value for the seminary and a potential real detriment for all the people that live
No, I
around it.
understand. That's why
Right?
we're having
Yeah.
all this time and effort and discussions about protecting the abutters and the town.
I just think the
here,
discussions about
it's-
protecting the
it's
abutters should
the-
include the abutters.
And the abutters have had ample chance to be participating in this process. And Jake,
Like at the community house, when we all like put up whiteboards and like talked about ideas for what everyone in town wanted to see there. I don't understand when we were supposed to give our input, that now all of a sudden Bill's getting shouted down for coming up with an idea, and you say, we've spent hundreds of hours. That's disrespectful. I don't understand when we were supposed to give this input.
we have spent the last 10 months collecting data to understand what the property looks like, what its potential values are, what its potential uses are, and then saying, how are we going to protect that piece of property, its character, the abutters, the town, and come up with a draft bylaw that lays out what those protections and potential uses are, and then present those to the public for however long that takes to get the public's input on their preferred uses and how they'd like to see that property evolve over time. That's the nature, and I think that's part of the problem, is the public does not understand that process, and that's what we're doing on May 16th, is to say, hey, here's how we have evolved and this process and gotten to where we are, so that the public has something to react to.
Right.
Well, I think it's more than just something to react to. You're putting illustrative plans that you've already drawn, what you want where, and I know that you're saying, like, we can't talk about the septic, but when you draw 6 acres of utility expansion in the plans, it's tough for people to ignore, particularly the neighbors who live across the street from the existing shared septic system.
And here's the problem with communication, is people assume the worst of what comes out of other people's mouths. I clarified, I said, at this public presentation, we're going to have about 20 minutes to have questions and answers. We can't get into the minutia of all the elements that we've been considering for 10 months in 20 minutes. That would be impossible to have a thoughtful, carefully constructed, informative conversation. That's what we're going to do going forward when we open these up and we say, hey, these are all the things that we have thought about, that we're concerned about, that we think are important to protect the abutters, the town, the character of the property. What do you think?
Right, and I understand your frustration, I really do, and it's not as if it's readily apparent, but every single one of our meetings is a public hearing, and the public can participate. And on January 10th, the planning board, it outlined its preferences for the site. And the seminary is not necessarily as enthusiastic about these preferences as the planning board is. But the first thing we did was recognize that the abutters need protection. And so it's not lost on us. And so we have competing demands. I mean, there are other people in town who want to see more tax revenue. And there are people who are, whether it's legitimate or not, concerned that the seminary might just sell this property to a nonprofit, and we're back to square one with a large site that yields no benefit to the town financially, but the town incurs costs educating any children that live on that site. So we have this difficult task, but at no time did we ever intend to cut off communication with anyone. So when you make your statements, don't ascribe a bad motive to the planning board. In fact, we're really trying to do the right thing for everyone.
I appreciate that, and I apologize if I.
We're really trying to do the right thing, and I appreciate Bill's comments, but you know, had you been at all the different planning board meetings, you would have seen how this process evolved, and all of a sudden, no offense, Bill, we have 3 new scenarios that we've never seen before. So, and they're not excluded by this draft overlay district. They're not. And then I'm not going to talk at length because we are close to ending at 9 o'clock, which is a first for us. We usually go to 10. Nothing is final.
Oh, no,
Finalized a thing.
I understand. I understand that.
It's not until we hear from the public at a number of meetings, May 16th, another in early June, and then through the summer, are we going to say, okay, we're now satisfied that we have sufficient input from all parties that we can propose the following, and it will reflect what we hear at these public meetings. So I know that in the consultant's final report, there was significant square footage on that site. The public may not want that level of development on that site. What level of development is appropriate for the site that respects the different preferences that the planning board has identified? And they are available. We now have a new web page and a timeline of what we've done with accompanying maps and memorandum. And so our process has been long and involved, and this is the first time I think the planning board has actually done this type of overlay district. I mean, the senior housing bylaw and some of the others are not quite like this. We're really playing 3-dimensional chess with a site that has a lot of potential and some serious constraints. But I just urge you to tell your neighbors that this is a process, and we're not close to the completion yet.
The only thing that I would add is when you talk about 20 minutes for public comment over 3 meetings, that's 60 minutes of public comment.
Not over 3 meetings.
Oh, no, 20 minutes at each meeting, right? If
Oh, no,
that's
no,
how you were going to do it.
Again, Jake, you're presuming exclusionary decision-making. It couldn't be farther from the truth. 20 minutes, this is the first public meeting to lay out the foundation of how we got to where we are now. We are mandated by law to have public meetings. Those public meetings could run 2 or 3 hours for each subject area. We will probably have a dozen or more public meetings to discuss the infinitesimal detail of our decision-making and the ramifications of each of those scenarios or components or elements of the bylaw.
Prior to it going to like
Oh,
the select
yeah.
board or anyone like that.
Absolutely.
It goes to you at town meeting.
Yeah.
So you as an abutter can vote against this, and not only that, you can get all your friends in town to vote
Right,
against it. If
but
you're
the idea
seriously
of
aggrieved.
getting those dozen meetings, 2 or 3 hours, can't happen by September town meeting, right? I mean, you'd never,
I
you'd
don't
never
think-
think you're on that timeline.
No, I don't
Not
think
having
we'll
a
have a
September, it'll
dozen.
probably be the end of October or
End of
November.
October, November. But we'll have as many meetings as we can
takes.
have. You know, trust me, we're now at 3 meetings a month. This is a planning board that normally meets twice a month. This is a retired person who thought she was retired. That's me. I'm working 20 hours a week at a minimum. So we couldn't be working any harder as a planning board to try and get this right. So I just urge you, don't come at us with an attitude that we're going to try and destroy your property values. That nothing could be further than the truth, really. Nothing could be further than the truth.
We'll see how,
I think the reality, Jake, is we understand the abutters actually are the controlling interest here. Because the way the political process works, when town meeting convenes to consider this, if there are 6, 10, 20 people that are there with torches and pitchforks screaming bloody murder, the rest of the community's going, who doesn't know probably much of anything.
Right.
Is gonna go, there seems to be a problem. We probably shouldn't support this until this gets straightened out.
no, I mean, look, the last thing I would suggest is to have a meeting with just the abutters. Invite the abutters to come and sit with this board and talk with this board.
Come on May 16th, please.
I will be there for my 120 seconds on May
No,
16th.
and
I will be
we're-
there for that.
We're only saying that so everyone who wants to speak has the
But I know it's
opportunity.
it's 2 minutes, we're giving 20 minutes at 10 people to speak. I can tell you, all my neighbors are gonna wanna speak.
No, this is you
Like,
make
it's a- it's
no,
a-
you make a very good point, and I want to make sure that we, in structuring the agenda, that we lay the foundation. This is to just show the public what we have been doing. This is the kickoff. That's all.
Yeah,
Now, this is not to get into great detail. We've been talking about the survey because we want to collect preferences and information from that. This is just to announce, here's what we've done, here's where we are, and here's where we're going forward. The public will have multiple lengthy opportunities to dive into the details and tear it up and input into how this should be constructed. So when we say just 2 minutes, it's just to understand, what's on the top of your mind. Oh, traffic.
and May 16th probably isn't my meeting, but I'll still be there, but probably one of the other ones will be,
But we have to lay the
because
foundation so you.
trust me, I've read all your materials, I've listened to most of the meetings, not all of them. I understand. I mean, like I said, the one thing that is a little bit disappointing is that there wasn't more merit put on single-family houses. But I understand you tell me that the town doesn't want single-family
Well, the
houses.
consultant said it was a loss leader. for
A
the town.
consultant said that.
Right.
One consultant.
Right. So I love, so this input's important because you reflect sort of the general understanding of what we're doing or what we're not doing, or
Yep.
what we have successfully communicated or what we're not communicating. So this is important and invaluable input. So if we get you and I in talking, there's a little friction there, that's okay because
100%.
we get light,
Yep.
we get progress.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's why I sat down with.
I'm not going to keep you guys anymore. It's 9:15, but thank you.
Come on the 16th.
I just-
Tell-
I'll be there.
Tell your friends to come too.
They will be there.
I have a couple things. I think in hearing Jay, is it? Jake, I think some of the important things, I'm going to put this in an email to you, but just that this is the kickoff. We need to say that at the beginning of the meeting, just like we want to say like what we're going to tell them at the beginning of the meeting. And that I also think that we don't want to bring something to town meeting that's going to fail. So we need your input. I think it's important to say some of these things so that it sets that tone. So I think if you walk into a meeting and somebody says this is just the kickoff, then we're not going to have inside people thinking, I got to get my thing in tonight.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And just also if we say that, this is going to town meeting. So like we're wasting our time if we don't really hear you. So this is what we're here for, and just because you and I know that, but that's kind of bringing this conversation that's in our heads out because of what you,
I think Jake's comments were very illuminating, because, he was saying, I'm only gonna have, 120 seconds to ask detailed questions. Well, obviously, I did a poor job of communicating, and maybe we did a poor job of communicating what the intent is. And I
Right.
think that's critical when you open this and say, here's the intent tonight. This is just the first step in a long journey. So,
You're absolutely right, and I want to kind of speak with you maybe a little more, because you have good ideas about how to frame just that initial presentation. Bill is going to get me his questionnaire as soon as possible.
I'm going to send you my comments. I've been trying to take notes on some of this stuff.
Please do.
Because of what different people have been saying that would be helpful in your intro or as we go along. I also wanted to mention, I have a couple more FAQs for Jonathan. I think the Bridge Street thing came up several times, and maybe that needs to be in the FAQs, like why Bridge
In there.
Street? Oh, is it? Oh,
Yep,
okay,
it's
I
just
missed
third
that.
item.
Sorry. So you already covered that, great. And then I also wondered if we wanted to put something like the planning board role and what we're charged with is balancing that social, environmental, economic. I don't know. Those were just two things as we went through it. So I just wanted to share that. Okay, that's all I got.
So, unless anybody has anything further to discuss, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Woo! I make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second motion.
What?
Nice.
Any discussion about adjourning? Hearing none, when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you assent to the motion to adjourn? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Billy and I.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth, her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Mitchell, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. I think we just hit a milestone. This is the earliest we've
I know.
adjourned in a long time.
I'm gonna get home and I don't know what to do with myself.
I know what I'm going to do when I get home. I'm going to eat.
You should not be